The magic does not lie in itching to tell the story. It lies in attention to detail, playing it straight without taking sides. Hello and welcome to the program Straight Strokes with Gowhar Geelani. I'm delighted to have with me Victoria Schofield, a renowned author who has written 4 editions on Kashmir. The first book came in 1996. Welcome to the program, Victoria. It's great to have you here. My first question would be about the narratives on Kashmir. Usually there has been this perception in Kashmir that there are either the Indian state's narrative or the Pakistani state's narrative about Kashmir, but not a lot of writing has come from the native Kashmiris. But since the 90s, there has been some kind of a change if we start from the Kashmiri American poet late Agha Shahid Ali, and then Basharat Pir's Curfewed Night, and now many more like Mirza Wahiz and other people are writing even fiction, non-fiction. So how do you think that still the gap exists, or you think it's a work in progress, or a positive change has been made?
Well, I would definitely say I think it's a positive change. When I started writing on Kashmir, one of the difficulties was that I couldn't really find the Kashmiri voice. The texts I were referring to were either written by Pakistanis or they were written by Indians. And that, as a writer, when you're trying to encapsulate a history, makes it more difficult because you're aware you're looking at a subject from one particular perspective. And I think what I found initially was almost it leapt out at me the deeper I dug, was that where is the Kashmiri voice? This is all very well hearing what India and Pakistan thinks about the issue, but I want to know what the people think. And obviously, as a writer and a journalist, you get that from reading other books or indeed from interviewing people. And so initially it was difficult, but I think as the issue with greater abilities, social media, etc., has come up, you do find people with more confidence feeling, this is my story, I want to tell my story. And that's what you got, I think, with the really groundbreaking book, Basharat Pir's Curfewed Night, where suddenly you felt, well, this isn't just a one-sided account, because it mirrors how he thinks about his own life against the backdrop of what's happening. And then other writers have come on, and now almost, I think what is very good is that Kashmiris themselves have been empowered to take control of their history, of their lives.
But what would you say that how Kashmiris been able to telegraph their message and sort of yell at the world that this is my story? How is international community or the intellectual community in the Western world responding to this new change?
Well, I think they're responding positively because, again, when a book is written in a novel form, you can often write in novels what you can't necessarily write factually. That strikes a chord, and what we're looking for with all literature is a greater understanding, and you can get that through novels, you can get that through non-fiction, but it's very important because if you want people to understand what's going on, you've obviously got to hear an authentic voice. It's no good to hear a voice which has spent life in a greater comfort in another country. You need that voice to be indigenous.
So, Victoria, one more question. I think it's unfair if I don't mention that there has been a lot of writing on Kashmir by Kashmiris in other languages. For example, Urdu, Kashmiri, and there have been great poets from Mehjoor to even Rahman Rahi of today, and Mushtaq Kashmiri and others who have given voice to the voiceless in a way in their poetry. And there is a lot of writing in Kashmiri language and Urdu. But specifically talking about the English language narrative by the native Kashmiris, how do you see this transition?
Well, I think what's remarkable is how good the English is of the Kashmiri writers. I mean, obviously it's wonderful to write in the vernacular, as we would call it, in your own language, but you will get a less wide readership, and by definition, I mean, that's just the way it is, that English is a very widely popular language that a lot of people read, so you're going to get a larger readership. I think the quality that I've read in English from Kashmiri writers has been excellent. Because again, we're talking about a competitive market. I mean, it's nothing to do with Kashmir, but the industry is such. Book writing, it's very competitive, and a book that's not well written or the story just doesn't hold together is not going to sell in the same way that a book that's very compelling will sell. And as I say, I think that to me, you asked whether there's more to be done, there's more to be written.
Work in progress.
Where yes, it's a work in progress. When I'm not saying that there's enough, but I would say it's a very positive step, especially in the last 20 to 25 years since I've been following Kashmir literature, that I see this growing up of Kashmiris, young Kashmiris feeling empowered to write what they feel and what they think.
Also, one more remarkable or positive thing has been that there is a lot of women, Kashmiri women who are writing. Like you have Natasha Cole, you have Mona Bhan, you have Athar Zia, you have Insha, and other Dr. Romana Makhdoumi who have come up with their narratives just to give the women's perspective of the conflict. How do you see that?
Well, again, I think it's absolutely vital. I mean, I would say this as a woman myself, in any environment, that we don't want books simply written by men. I'm currently reading Mishal Hussein's book, The Skills, where she's describing, as a woman, this very unfair world, even in the West, that you live in terms of being a woman. And I think, for any region, you've got to have both perspectives. And that's, again, another work in progress, very positive change in terms of the literature on Kashmir.
A very personal question to your, specific interest in Kashmir. What brings you to Kashmir more often? And you write a lot about Kashmir. What is this special connection that you have with Kashmir?
Well, it's a special connection. I think when you're younger, you maybe go to places and you retain them in your heart and soul. And I first came to the Valley of Kashmir in 1981, and I saw this beautiful place with these spectacular mountains and wonderful people, wonderful hospitality. And when the Troubles began in the late 1980s, early 1990s, I felt, well, why I wanted to learn more about what was going on. And what I have learned as a writer and as a journalist is you're only as good as your own research. And so in order to understand, you have to be out there in the field yourself to take your own opinions rather than relying on second party, third party sources, because then it's diluted. And as writers, what one wants above all else is to be authentic. Whether you're writing a novel or whether you're writing a non-fiction, I think one wants authenticity, and you gain authenticity by coming to a region. And I really care. I have many friends here, and I really love the region and I love the people.
So what would be your words of advice, if I were to say it in that way, for the young generation of writers in Kashmir who want to tell their story, narrate their story to the entire world? You are an eminent author, renowned all over the world. So what would be your advice to these young and passionate writers?
Well, hold the dream. Men, go for it. I think one should not ever have an enterprise that you want to do and you don't try. I think it requires courage. It required courage for me to come here in the early 90s and leave my 3 small children. But if you don't try, if you don't put your hat in the arena, you'll never succeed. And I would always encourage people, especially people who like to write, who love the written word, because the written word is very powerful, and you can convey feelings. And in a way, it's also a very cathartic process for people to be able to feel that you are understood. And I think one of the biggest challenges in life in general is when people feel alone and they don't feel a fellow spirit, they don't feel understood. But I think if you feel that you can be empowered to put pen to paper or use the computer as we do now,
new technologies,
or
gadgets.
new technology, then it's an outlet and you can gain greater understanding. But you can also feel that you've made some small contribution to the body of literature that's out there.
When we talk about connecting to the wider world, wider literary world, I come from downtown, as I told you earlier. There used to be a tradition of shop front gatherings outside the shop fronts, you would be exposed to a lot of politics around the world. You would listen to the BBC radio, Voice of Germany, Voice of America, and know about all these brilliant authors from George Orwell to the modern authors. So these were the lessons you would get on the shop fronts. But obviously those spaces, those intellectual spaces, have there's a question mark because of this 3-decade-old conflict. What would you suggest to again to this new generation of writers with a lot of courage and conviction, with a lot of clarity of thought, and that will to do something and to tell this story, how to gain those intellectual spaces again?
Well, maybe you should set up reading rooms like we have.
The
we have
1930s.
book clubs. Well, also like in the 1930s, but we have book clubs, and encourage people to read poetry. Well, you're rather reminding me of when I was in Afghanistan some years ago, and a young man approached me in the street, and he said, could he talk to me? And I turned around, and it was young Afghan, and I said, yes, hello. And he said, my teachers emphasize when we see a foreigner, we must practice our English because I am reading Chaucer. And I thought that I love that idea that, that there's all that literature out there. So maybe that's what you should do. It's nothing controversial. Have a book club, get poetry out, because poetry, we're all taught to read Shakespeare. It has huge lessons in terms of writing and literature and style and content. So set up a book club.
In George Orwell, when he talked about Why I Write, there were these 4 principles which he talked about: historical impulse and sheer egoism of a writer, and the other 2. And when in the 1930s there was this, the Spanish War was going on, the Great Depression, the Spanish Civil War, and the Great Depression, and here we had this kind of influence from the leftist. The reading room parties and other things going on, the uprising against the Maharaja, Dogra Maharaja, and then the 1989, and then came the 1989, the historic fall of the Berlin Wall, and here the armed struggle. So, and now this new age of rebellion in Kashmir, the new language of resistance. How do you see this all in these? If we see what was happening globally and what was happening in Kashmir locally, even when the Afghan jihad was going on, and here, there was something going on.
Well,
in
I
Kashmir.
think one of the biggest mistakes is wanting to parachute into history, and speaking as a historian, that one wants to sort of start off with a particular date, and the important thing is both to go horizontally to look at the region as to what's going on, and also vertically to cause and effect as to what might have taken place in previous decades. Obviously that is difficult in this soundbite age where everybody wants to just tick boxes and
Instant
understand
coffee.
understand things sort of in a flash, but you can't really do that. And so I think for anyone wanting to understand what's taken place in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, they've got to go back in
Regional
time,
context.
but they've also got to go across in terms of what was happening regionally. And you're absolutely right, the Afghan jihad played a huge influence. The fall of the Berlin Wall played a huge influence. And only by understanding can we really comment efficiently and authentically.
True.
And as I say, that's the key, is authenticity.
So what makes you write? What are your 4 principles?
Well,
if you
yes, that's interesting. What makes me write? A love of the written word. I grew up always wanting to write. The idea that somehow, even if you don't necessarily know, what you say may touch someone else's soul, and they may feel inspired, that they may learn something, and the desire to myself understand more.
So, for every, Mahmood Darwish, there is Agha Shahid Ali. So, it was a pleasure talking to you.